With that, please welcome Jamie Reeve, Vice President of Wealth Strategies at Northern Trust, to introduce today's speaker.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians, distinguished guests, and Saj. If you do the right thing and you do it with the right people, it can be a joyous ride. Does anyone know that quote? I wouldn't think so. It's attributable to our speaker today. And I heard it as I was doing an amazing amount of due diligence reading for this introduction. Jerry Jendusa is an entrepreneur and so much more. The entrepreneurism is incredible, but if you ask me, his true gift is what he's doing, paying it forward with all of the philanthropy, not the least of which is the free throw-a-thon for the Make-A-Wish Foundation in his kids' schools at Mukwonago High School. But if you do the right thing, and you do it with the right people, it can be a joyous ride. That's not too different from the four-way test here at the Rotary, right? Slightly different, perhaps more succinct than our 4 questions. But this is the way this guy lives. Jerry's a local kid done good. He went to UWM. He started his business in his parents' basement. Not even his own basement. His parents' basement. He did okay. It grew to be over $100 million in the aerospace industry. He sold it. Quite successfully, he continues his entrepreneurism and he continues to pay it forward, not just in philanthropy, but helping other entrepreneurs in a variety of ways. If you recognize David Gruber, you might also recognize Jerry. They're both moguls on Milwaukee's version of the Shark Tank called Project Pitch It. He's giving back in multiple ways, and today he's going to share with us many of the lessons that he's learned along the way. So please join me in welcoming Jerry Jendusa to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I understand Peter Fagan was here. Peter Fagan also was on that show, Project Pitch It. Love it. And, Jamie was talking about this free throw-a-thon, and he was talking, there's a guy who plays for the Bucks, and his name is Pat Connaughton, and we were talking earlier when we were eating. And if you think of wonderful human beings, Pat is one of those guys. And when I think of the Make-A-Wish program and the power of giving and then teaching other people how to give is really an important point. And so in that Mukwonago free throw-a-thon as an example, we have Wish Kids, we have Wish Kids families, we have kids from a community, and we form a grassroots effort with a 2-week blitz to raise a lot of money to grant wishes. But those kids that are involved in helping to grant the wishes, it instills some things in those individuals, which is pretty special. In this last year, without any major fundraisers, just with some pledges, it raised over $145,000, which is really cool. So my name is Jerry Jendusa. I'm gonna share a story, which is this MTech story. And then I'm going to talk about some other things that I think relate back to the Rotary Club. And when I think of truth, fairness, building goodwill, and better friendships, is something that the Rotary I was not really that aware of. And so when I think of the things that you're doing here, and for the higher purpose as to why you're doing them, we were talking a little bit about clean water. We were talking about some things you're doing with therapy for younger adults that might have some mental and behavioral health issues, or anything where we're involved in helping a community grow is truly, to me, what is most important. So when you think of entrepreneurialism, you think of growth, and it's not necessarily that concept of growing things financially. It's growing through others. And so if we're able to grow through others, and we're able to do a couple of things, I think great things can happen. So the MTech story actually wasn't in my parents' basement; it was in my own basement in Wind Lake. Is a little wrong on that story. And there was a company that was formed, and it was called MTech Aerospace, and that company was like a little baby to me when I was 26 or 27 years old. That company was founded in that basement, and it grew to over 660 employees, and it was in 7 different locations. We were in Switzerland, we were in Brazil, we were in Winnipeg, we were in Montreal, we were in Miami, Florida, we were in Great Falls, Montana, and our headquarters was in New Berlin, Wisconsin. And I got to learn so many things on that 18-year journey that it was really, really, truly amazing. And so when you think of a business owner, you think of business, people typically they think of capitalism right away, or you're doing something, you're growing something because you want to make a lot of money. And if you're doing it for those reasons, they're typically not very successful. So in that particular story, I didn't fully know what I was doing, and I probably still don't really know what I'm doing today. And so the need to ask for help is really, really critical. And so as you think of stories, I want to relate a couple things here. And I think the first part is providing hope. So when you think of that, even with this group here, where you're providing hope for someone else. If you're an entrepreneur and you're starting up, where are you getting the hope from? If you're dealing with a banker and you have no customers, you have no money, are they really going to lend you any money? Probably not. So a lot of times you're told what you can't do. And what I like to think about and try to help others is what you can do and then how you can go about doing it. So it becomes more of this mindset pivot or a mindset change. And in this world, hope is something that's really, really important and very, very critical. When you have hope, you can get into growth, and then you can help create a culture of growth. So when I think of growth and I think of a culture of growth, and I think of growing people or allowing people to grow themselves, that also is a really interesting concept. I do a fair amount of work with smaller businesses and business owners that are in the African American community, and they're within certain zip codes. And in some ways, having the ability to have hope to help create jobs, to have hope that no, you can actually do this. 50% of entrepreneurs don't have college degrees. And then when you think of business, you think of business and the fact that business can be really, really complicated. And how can we make things less complicated? So first we're starting with hope, and we're giving people the chance to be successful. We're looking at creating this culture of growth. We're not trying to pigeonhole people or put people into boxes. When I was very young, my mom, she took away all of the coloring books that my grandma gave to me. I was like, Mom, why did you take away these coloring books? She said, I don't want you to draw the lines on something that's already been created within the coloring book. I want you to think outside of the box. I want you to be completely unique in the thought process. Maybe it was just because she didn't really like grandma very much and she really didn't like the fact, but I don't know. But you think of that. If somebody is starting a business and you're told you can't do it, if somebody is going down a career path, if you can follow your dreams and follow your passions, that's going to take you a pretty far way. But then when you're doing that, you're following your dreams, you're following your passion, but now there's got to be a way to operationalize what it is that you're doing. So we're starting with hope. we're being inspired, we're going down, we're having our passion and our purpose that's defining us. And then from there, admitting what you don't know and becoming very, very vulnerable. So if you think of that, it's hard for me, and I don't know if it's hard for people in this room, to really be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you might ask for help. You might share things that you don't know. You might not have to feel like if you're a business owner, you're the smartest guy in the room, because maybe you're not the smartest guy in the room. And then when you bring talent around you, that talent is that human capital that you don't want to keep in that box, regardless of what position they're in, regardless of what title they have, or regardless of what schooling they have or what degree they have. So that's another concept, is having a title could actually, in effect, be very, very limiting. So it doesn't matter what position you are in a company, whether it's a for-profit company, it's a not-for-profit company. Everyone has these gifts, and to leverage that human capital can allow you to grow things in very significant ways. So even thinking of going back to that Make-A-Wish thing in McGuanago, Wisconsin, it's you have the passion, you have the purpose, but now you've got to be able to execute on what it is that you're doing. And then you have to be able to establish some goals while keeping things very, very simple. So every single employee, every single person in the moment of truth can make decisions. And then we have people that make decisions, and if you get people excited about making decisions, now we're forming what I would say is a culture of growth. And what you're talking about here, truth, fairness, building goodwill, better friendships. And that to me seems what this organization is doing. And then it becomes a continual journey of learning. So when Jamie introduced me, he said, Jerry's still continuing to do good things. I learn more from others. I learn more from listening than from talking. I now have 3 different businesses that I own. One is on the north side of Milwaukee. It's called BioCut. One's in Madison. It's called Vendura Industries. One's down in Lexington, Kentucky. It's called Ardent Animal Health. And those employees that are so engaged, they're the ones that keep me fresh and keep my ideas going. And that whole concept of age difference, diversity, inclusivity, what does that mean? Getting people together collectively on the same page, in a single page, is what it is that I profess. So we have this concept that we created, and I'm not here to sell this concept, I'm here to share this concept. And it's getting everybody on the same page in a single page. Starting with your passion and your purpose and what your vision and what your mission is. Then identifying what those major initiatives are that you want to accomplish. Then establishing some goals. And then measuring and doing what you say and saying what you do to help drive growth. Whether it's a for-profit organization, it's a not-for-profit organization, whether it's a team, whether it's a club. Getting people on the same page in that single page with that concept of having hope, being inspired, working with like-minded people that you really enjoy working with, and then having that continual success and continual journey. So that the MTech story is a really neat story that was 18 years of my life, and then that business sold. And you can think of something where you're like, oh my gosh, this thing is so successful and is 100 million and is sold for 200 plus million and all those things. But even after the sale of that company, those were actually really tough times for me because I was more lonely because my whole definition of my success was through this organization. So it's more than typically about the money. And then I realized I didn't necessarily have the patience to stay golfing. I realized I really didn't enjoy doing that. I was very sporadic in my thought, that typical entrepreneur who's chasing shiny objects all over the place. So I had to stay very engaged and very active in what it is that we're doing. Even within the state of Wisconsin, in the city of Milwaukee, in southeastern Wisconsin, you can share metrics about our state, about how great the state is or how bad the state is. You could share metrics about entrepreneurialism and how it's just a terrible state of affairs in Wisconsin. I would beg to disagree. The state of Wisconsin, with our university systems, with our high schools, with the way the community is being energized and even re-energized, is just an amazing, amazing thing. There's so many people that I know that go away from the state of Wisconsin and they come back here to raise their families. Sometimes if there's a stigma in Milwaukee because we're a smaller version of Chicago, that's what we are. And we should take great pride in that. There are so many unique, diverse individuals that are in this state and in this city that really makes it something that's very, very special. And it depends, once again, as to how we look at things. And so it's a mindset, it's a thought process. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? What are we going to do? What do we want to accomplish? And if it's a journey of continuous improvement, do we have a ways to go? Yes. Are there areas to improve? Always. But once again, it's a journey of continuous improvement. So if I'm running an organization and it's MTech, I'm never satisfied with those results. We have a current state that we're trying to change into a future state. And through that thought process, we're going to put goals in place and measure what it is we're trying to accomplish. So it's a journey with whatever we do in this world. So the first part is having hope. The second part is being vulnerable. Like really, really being vulnerable. Like I don't know something. If you think of that, it's really kind of interesting. I remember going into certain plants or certain locations, and employees would be like, I've never met the owner before. Or I never did orientations with an owner before. And why did you do that? And it's interesting. I used to think I was so smart strategically, right? That, oh my gosh, we were going to do this, and we're in this aerospace community. We've got Boeing, we've got Airbus, we've got Embraer, we've got the OEMs, we've got the aftermarket, we've got the military, we've got all these things. Most of those employees, they enjoyed most about what I did is I wrote a personal birthday card for everybody on their birthdays. My oldest, Nathan, he's like, Dad, all you do for work, you play on your computer and you write birthday cards. That's a pretty darn easy job. And he's actually pretty accurate. It was a pretty easy job. And the bigger that company got, the easier it became because I allowed the other people that had more talent than me to actually run that company. But it was aligned with the vision and mission. It was with these single-page plans, and it was accelerating growth through others. And those growth stories are not always growth when you think of growth in revenue or growth of profit. Some of the greatest growth stories that I can remember, one was 9/11, 2001. And just most of us are old enough in this room, maybe Morgan's not. Table over there, maybe not quite as much. But 9/11, 2001, think of where you were at that time frame. And I'm in an aviation company dealing with commercial airlines. And there were these aircraft that were hitting into these towers. And then I'm worried about where are our employees? And there was an employee in Australia, and there was one. So is everybody going to be safe? And then worried about what are we going to do? Like literally, we're going to lose over 50% of our business right away. People didn't want to fly anymore. People didn't want to travel. But if you think of that moment and you try to flip it in your minds, every problem is an unforeseen opportunity. So if we can say that and think about that, every problem is an unforeseen opportunity. Every problem's and that's what I would do to just keep myself sane. Otherwise, I'd probably go cry. But so that was 9/11. The other one was 2008. I remember 2008, the great TARP reform. The automotive CEOs flying in on their corporate aircraft and people being very upset. So then they'd go lobby to the government in like their minivans. And these are guys that are making millions of dollars a year. That's not very efficient and effective driving in your minivan to go lobby as your industry is crashing. But 2008 was another one of those interesting examples. Every problem is an unforeseen opportunity. Our business dropped. In 2008, we were projected from 72 million to go to 92.5 million in the matter of a month. We had to drop that forecast from 72 million down to 55 million. And if you think of that, and then you're worried about your people, how do you do that? And how do you gain traction in the right way to get buy-in? Had to realize once again I wasn't the smartest guy in the room. I had to get other people involved, but I had to do the things that you talk about here: truth, fairness, building goodwill, and better friendships. Okay, so we have this challenge. We're going to have a gap, and this gap is going to be something. I don't even know what the gap was. We didn't do all those hires right away, but there was a gap there, and maybe it was like a $4 or $5 million gap. First thing, owners had to cut their pay. Senior leadership had to cut their pay. What could we do with people that might want to retire early? What could we do with temporary layoffs where people wanted to take off for the holidays? So September, December. I remember moving my cube from that typical executive corner office. It wasn't a corner office anymore. I actually was in a cube. And we established a thematic goal. There's an author by the name of Patrick Lencioni, and he has these little fables, and they're really interesting books. I see a head nod there. You probably read some of those. But capturing our unfair share as a thematic goal and rallying the troops behind what it is that we're doing, and then go out and execute relentlessly. So plan, do, check, act. Getting everybody on the same page in a single page, everybody in a moment of truth to make a decision based on behalf of the customer. Plan, do, check, act. Business doesn't have to be all that complicated. But it goes back to what some of the values are that you're teaching here. And so today, when I look at certain things, and I look at certain businesses, and some are more successful than others, and I always ask myself, why? And what defines, for starters, it goes, but what defines success? And what does success mean to each individual? What does growth mean to them? Is it always a financial play? Typically, it's not. There's growth in many, many ways. So I was sharing growth stories of 2001 and then a growth story of 2008. And those were times that were very trying times. So I learned more in those times about myself, what I was good at, what I wasn't quite as good at, and then about the rest of that team and that team that was there. As we do more training and developing of staff and different leaders, I think Morgan and I, we counted something like 24 leaders from that company, that organization, that now are either CEOs, business owners, presidents. And it's just amazing to see the friendships that stayed and where that thing resided. And that particular business was sold to a strategic partner called BE Aerospace, that then was sold to a company called Rockwell Collins, that then was sold to a company called Raytheon Aircraft. And then that facility, recently it was in the Business Journal, is shutting down, or it's down to like 20 employees. So if you think of that, we didn't have the funding. We didn't have that same potential growth that this larger strategic publicly traded company had. And after that company was sold, and it was sold for a gross multiple of EBITDA for those that are finance people in this room. How many are finance? Jamie's a finance person. Who else knows finance in the room? Raise your hand. So 15 times EBITDA for a business. 15 times EBITDA. $255 million. And so $255 million, 15 times EBITDA. We had 100 engineers in Brazil shut down. We had about 30 employees in Baden-Bulach, Switzerland. It's down to 1 or 2 service people only. New Berlin, Wisconsin had about 300 employees. It's down to 15. Montreal's shut down. Winnipeg has about 40 or 50 employees. And I don't, that's a tough one. So you think of, this is my baby, I gave up my baby, right? This is to a strategic purchase, you're out, that's fine. But where did the value come from? Where is that value proposition? And those are things that you reflect on as you grow things or you're involved in certain businesses. So the first thing, having hope, inspiration, just always trying to do the right thing, being vulnerable, and then operationalizing what it is that you want to grow and relentlessly pursuing that. So if you want to be world class, you have to do world class things. And so if there's certain businesses that maybe aren't successful as others, maybe they don't have the drive. Maybe they're not establishing those goals. We talked about that Make-A-Wish thing. We talked a little bit about Pat Connaughton. In getting to know Pat, his workout routines are phenomenal. And his thought process as to how he can establish goals and how driven he is from an individual level to a team-based level that then leads to world championships. That same thing applies to business. Simple goals, goal setting, relentless execution of what some of those plans are become really, really critical. Then establishing realistic expectations and taking the process, and instead of thinking in long years, maybe thinking in days or weeks or months as to what steps you're going to take to be more successful, especially when there's a crisis. So there's a lot of people that think I'm really smart, and they said, hey, for the pandemic, can you talk about what businesses should do to pivot? It seems like pretty basic stuff, right? I mean, whether there's a pandemic or there's not a pandemic, you're always trying to grow, you're always trying to change, you're always listening to your customers, you're trying to operationalize what it is that you do. And then you have to be willing to change. But you have to be vulnerable. You have to ask for help to allow things to work. So certain restaurants made it, others didn't. And the ones that made it, maybe they went to curbside service. Maybe they did drive-through. Maybe they were more flexible with how they communicated. So, the interesting thing when you analyze that and you simplify it and you relentlessly pursue what it is that you want to pursue, really good things potentially can happen. So operationalizing this culture of growth with realistic expectations. Then most critical is review what it is that you're doing. Once again, it sounds so simple. Can a business owner make time to actually review what happened for that month? Can a meeting take place if the leader isn't there at the meeting? The basic, simple, fundamental things that sometimes don't happen. And that actually has gotten me to be more and more frustrated with some business owners as we do advising and coaching. Like, come on, guys. Why do businesses succeed? Why do some fail? Why do certain organizations succeed and others don't succeed? And my theory is it comes back to leadership. And it comes back to some of the values that you're preaching here. But then you're probably doing some things where you're doing some action steps. You're reviewing what you're doing. You're establishing goals to reach higher heights. The biggest thing is flexibility. You have to be flexible. When I first started my career, I used to write these business plans that were 50, 60 pages long. And I'd write them for stakeholders that maybe weren't the right people to write them for. I'd write them for investors. I'd write them for bankers. As that business grew to be all those different locations that I described, we ended up doing everything on a single page. Everybody had a single page plan that rolled up to a top level plan. So everybody in the moment of truth could make a decision based on behalf of the customer. So keep it really simple, make it flexible so you can pivot fast. If you have to go up the corporate ladder all the time, there might be a little bit of waste that's involved in that. Then, having the ability to celebrate, to really, really have fun. And Jamie, that's what you were describing. If you're doing things with people that you really enjoy working with, that you really enjoy being around, it tends to be a lot of fun. And every once in a while, when you're doing things where there's somebody who's just a pain or they're a naysayer, or we can't do this, or we tried this before, it tends not to be as much fun. So having the ability to have a lot of fun in what you do becomes really, really critical. We have room for some questions. And there's got to be at least a couple of questions, because otherwise I'm going to sit up here and it'll be very lonely. Lonely at the top, as they say.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit about MTech, and I am not familiar with the company. So how did you get started in it, and what exactly did it do?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking that. And I probably should have done a much better job of explaining that. When I was very young, I was approached by an engineer at Gulfstream Aerospace in Savannah, Georgia, and he said, if you ever could find a way to replace fluorescent tubes in airplanes, you should do it. That was the genesis as to how that business started. And we went down a path of becoming the first company in aviation. This goes back to 1996, 97, 98, to develop light emitting diodes for fluorescent tubes, halogen bulbs, incandescent bulbs, and then interior and exterior of planes, along with engineering services, power supplies, all based on somebody giving us an idea.
Well, congratulations on your record. My gosh, if I could be half of what you are. So you said something about pivot. What can a business do to pivot? And you started your presentation saying Wisconsin's a pretty good place. The recent polls suggest that some people would disagree with you. Right track, wrong track. And if you had a group of young people like we're dealing with from Beloit or Milwaukee or Kenosha, et cetera, they probably would come down on the wrong track side. So the question is how to pivot. And you're dealing with adults largely. You didn't say you're dealing with youth. So what advice would you have for the youth that we're working with in Milwaukee, Kenosha, Neenah, and Beloit who think we're on the wrong track and have as a working premise a shout that they want to make to Wisconsin on equity issues, on opportunity issues, on sports issues? These are social entrepreneurs. These are kids. And they're coming up with a shout. What advice would you give to them to move the state from wrong track to right track, a pivot that they think is necessary?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. I think it first starts with truly understanding what's in their minds and that definition of success as to what it means to pivot and why. And for starters, if it's a young individual and they have an entrepreneurial idea, without destroying an idea, helping to get them understand what it takes or what goes into that. So it starts with getting that hope, having that aspiration, then establishing some guidelines and some working steps. And maybe it's something such as financial literacy, as some of the support work that you're doing. And are you referring mostly to entrepreneurial type endeavors, or are you?
The youth are organizing around freedom from want and freedom from fear. Want gets that opportunity for education, for jobs, et cetera. So organizing around that. And then the freedom from fear is not getting shot going
Yep.
to a Boys and Girls Club.
Right.
Those are the two organizing contexts. And the shout, if you will, would apply to an action statement that would not be their action statement, but a challenge to people in Wisconsin to do certain things. So it's not a job thing like you talked about, but it's a more general thing to also call to action, if you will.
Okay. That's a topic, that's a very deep topic, and there's so many different ways to help solve problems and to be able to listen and assess. And every situation to me is unique and different, and focusing on those individual situations to then put a plan of attack in place for that. I mean, you're doing it through education, you're doing it through foundational systems at home, you're doing it through what types of funding initiatives are taking place, etc. Yeah.
I think simplicity is underrated in business, so I'd be just curious how you got from the 50-page to the one page, because I love one pages, but I just think understanding the process that got you to there would be really helpful.
Yeah, for me, the process started in looking at a concept called lean manufacturing. I think that most people are familiar with. And so when you think of lean manufacturing, you're putting a process in place in a value stream map, and then you're simplifying what it is that you do and why, and aligning lean techniques with a vision and a mission, and then how you execute thereof. So plan, do, check, act is actually a lean term, PDCA. Perfect. And then if you align that with your financials, you close your books. How quick are you going to close your books? Where's there a gap? What actions can you take based on where there's gaps? And then even using simple color code systems. Green means great. Yellow means is a little bit problematic. Red means there's an issue. So now we can pivot a lot quicker through the human capital that we have. Employee engagement, everybody understands it. Because everybody shouldn't have to understand a financial statement in the details of it, but enough to be dangerous.
I want to try to ask this question without appearing to have an agenda. I don't know how we ought to be balancing the apparent need for government regulation, protect employees, collect the taxes, and allowing people to start a business without having to spend what seems like an incredible amount of time just figuring out what the regulations are, what the rules are, trying to comply with them at a stage when you don't necessarily have the money to hire high-priced legal talent or any legal talent or accounting talent. Do you feel, if you have a thought on this, whether we're doing a good job of balancing the need for government regulation, but allowing people to start businesses and do what we want people to do to grow a business and create jobs?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Without being politically motivated one breath or the other, when everybody should have an opportunity. This country is so great because you can start a business, you can get an EIN number, and you can go. When there's government regulations, they're typically there for very good reason. Sometimes they might be a little bit overreaching with the best intentions in the world. Sometimes even how we measure things, I would challenge. So for instance, we could measure the success in Wisconsin based on the amount of investment capital that's raised. So we raised a bunch of money and we had this many startups. But there's another way that you can measure that, which is how many jobs have been created. So for instance, in my story, we had an SBA loan for $150,000. We had $120,000 of family and friend money, and we had an $80,000 line of credit. And we bootstrapped that. I am most proud of how we grew that enterprise without any angel investors or venture capital. And I'm not fully touching on what you're saying, but all I would say is sometimes when I was growing my business, I was okay with paying taxes because it meant that we were doing some things that were really, really good. If there could be tax credits that were in place for a number of jobs that you're creating, if there could be certain tax credits that were in place for certain things to allow us to continue to grow, if there were certain taxes that we were paying that would take away our ability to add more valued staff to be able to organically grow, those would be things that I'd fundamentally have some challenges with. So I think we all try to do really good things to help. And sometimes it's just when we look at data, what data are we looking at? Thank you very much for having me at your Rotary meeting today.